Twitless, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Absolute Batman #2 by Scott Snyder and Mike Dragata. And I had to make sure I get my Snyders correct. So easy to kind
Yeah, it's
of
not the other Snyder.
Not
mix
the
those
other,
guys up.
not the Zach.
Yeah. Which is interesting because the tone of this book actually is very Zack Snyder in some ways. So it's really understandable. You could kind of like conflate them. You have this big bombastic Batman. Very clearly, it's trying to channel a visual dynamic energy. It's not necessarily super concerned with previous lore. Definitely going a very new direction. This comic starts off with more Bruce kind of flashback, remembering the murder, but the murder that we're used to seeing in Batman's lore, with the pearls being scattered and Joe Chill shooting him in Crime Alley, this happens like at a zoo. It's very much meant to channel the idea of a mass shooting, the sort of real kind of gun violence that we've had to experience in our country in some ways. I definitely think there's maybe even a political angle to that. And so we get a very different depiction of that. And of course, only one of Bruce parents dies. His mother is still alive, and she's smoking cigarettes and not acting like the sort of pure upper class elite that she's usually depicted at. She's more of a middle class mom who's smoking cigarettes and talking to Mayor Gordon in this case, because this series is recasting everybody in different roles. But the plot of the story picks up where the previous one left off, which is the Batman fighting against the party animals, led by, I believe, Roman Sionis, who is basically Black Mask. And so we're definitely doing the kind of Black Mask take here. But a very violent take on that, obviously. And Batman trying to fight back against that, and then being observed / stalked by Alfred, or John Wick, essentially.
And protected, right? That's his
Yeah, he's kind of deciding which one, whether he's going to protect him or not protect him. There's this sort of like, am I on your side or not on your side situation go on. And it all culminates with the dramatic revelation of the Batmobile, or the
Bad dump truck.
yeah, I was gonna say more like it's basically the Bat Killdozer.
Yeah,
it's essentially what it is, which is another very interesting image to channel there. But that's a brief overview of Absolute Batman.
I think it's interesting that I'll be very interested to hear what you guys think of this, since we've been talking about Absolute and how it's been playing musical chairs with a lot of the well-established and highly successful themes and origin stories for all these kind of characters and rogues gallery figures. What I think it might be attempting to do, what Absolute Batman may be trying to do, is to allow the essence of Batman to they kind of want to mothball or shelve a lot of the classic characters by resolving them, absorbing them into some sort of friendship status, whether it's the rogues gallery or people that are typically on his side, and just kind of let you already see a resolved departure, a sunsetting of these characters, where they can kind of signal, they can do the thing, they can mention whether it's Commissioner Gordon / Mayor Gordon, or it's all the famous villains from Dr. Croc to we don't see Joker, he's alluded to, but we can kind of we can shelve those characters, but somehow have them be a part of Batman's identity, so we can kind of nod to that and it feels kind of classic. And then we can push Batman into towards a villain that is unfamiliar, at least to a normie like myself, and have that be some sort of ultimate destination, a showdown. So we get a relatively fresh villain, while still head nodding, I guess, and still, paying, some might say fan service to the classic ones. So they're still there, but they're going to take a back seat for this entire arc, I think. that's a very interesting thing to do. I don't know if fans of the classic arcs are gonna find that that's a respectful retelling, even if it's an absolute kind of alternate, Elseworld story that we're playing with here, or if that feels, or if it does feel respectful, it feels kind of fun to see everybody represented. The gang is all here, right? But they're just not. They're just decidedly not important. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the connections to Batman proper are tenuous at best. He's definitely not the loner character,
Mm,
the dark vigilante that he is in the original iteration. I agree with you that there's a lot more familial attributes here, where he's hanging out. He's kind of just an average man. He's got a lot of support systems in place. His mother's there, particularly if he went through a childhood trauma. He has shoulders to lean on. And she talks to the mayor. She talks to Gordon, and then he
they
has
share a cigarette.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then she has a he has a vigilante Alfred like pop in and help him out when he needs it. The only thing I recognize from the original Batman is how he would suddenly introduce his spectacular gadgets, which in this case is a big Tonka dump truck. Uh, but he's hanging out with the classic villains and playing poker with them. So the
Mhm.
aspect of him being Batman feels shoehorned in to his dynamics with the other characters, the relationships there, and the circumstances that he kind of um, lives in. So I still like it. Is kind
Oh,
of the
okay.
bottom line. Yeah, it doesn't
Well,
have to
good.
be Batman. I think what they wanted to
Mhm.
do, they wanted to borrow the aesthetics, and I
Yeah.
liked I liked that this issue was it started to feel like it's growing a little bit more into its own thing. The last issue felt like it was just doing way too many member berries from
Mm.
the regular series and saying we're reintroducing them all into this new setting, but we want you to feel like you're getting all of the old things you love just completely turned on their head. Here, they're kind of giving you the scope of what this new thing is. And you have this gang that's attacking the city. You're introduced to a villain that's behind that called Arkham, which, even though it's like a reference to, uh, Arkham Asylum, it's now become like more fully its own entity. That it's actually a lot more interesting than it was before. I think it could even drop a little bit of the uh, strong Batman references. Like there's even times where you can tell that it's conscious of that, and it does self-referential humor where he's standing there looking at the city and he goes, uh, the line is Batman AF, and it's like
Yeah,
he's
well,
got
look
Yeah,
a
at that.
I didn't
Some
like
good
that line.
military language, but they set it up. They let you know what that meant, but then it
yeah.
was like, "We're gonna do the zoomer move for the joke." Yeah.
I one thing that's interesting. I'm not sure entirely how I feel about this because they're trying to do blue collar Batman. Because they're trying to push against the whole idea of him being the billionaire archetype, the sort of suave James Bond who's backed by basically infinite money, so he can kind of accomplish anything through that. And he's also,
Beating up poor people.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But it's the escapist fantasy there too, right? So he's blue collar Batman, and an issue I've got with that, right? Because the whole point is for him to be escapist, and one of the issues I've got with that approach, and also what we see in the Penguin series, is if you make it too blue collar, then it starts really losing the escapist aspects of it. Because if Batman is just the guy who could, it's not just that he's not us. He could be us if our lives were different, and that's kind of what we escape to. That's kind of
Mm,
what makes it interesting. It's what makes James Bond interesting. He's not just a guy who picks up a gun and kills people. That's just anybody. And that there's nothing aspirational or even super escapist that makes us want to be someone like that. So if you remove some of those interesting details about, like, wealth and power and the rest of that, then what do you have? You just have a guy who's just beating people up, and there's no escapism there. So the idea that we're making Batman a blue collar to make him more relatable, does making someone just like you doesn't all automatically make someone relatable. That's a kind of a misunderstanding I think some people have with fiction. What this comic does is kind of perplexing though, because they want him to be blue collar. He doesn't have one bat cave. He has a bunch of bat caves all over the city. They're kind of like temporary hideouts. And he doesn't have the same. It doesn't seemingly have the same wealth and backing that he's had in the past, but then he also has a crazy bat suit and gadgets and a killdozer that's like the size of a building. So sometimes it kind of feels like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, with like wanting to make this different Bruce Wayne who's not the suave billionaire, but then but then also like he still has to have, in order to be Batman, he has to have stuff that you could never get if you're anywhere near blue collar. So
Hmm.
that's, I don't know. It's kind of am I missing something? Like,
Well, I'd like to quickly suggest, so I actually I wanna introduce just kinda briefly, I wanna try an alternate take that makes Batman more relatable because of this Absolute Batman run. And that's because, between issue 1 and issue 2 of Absolute, let's see, I did the Ultimate to Absolute Batman thing that I promised I wouldn't do before we started this, but apparently, this is kinda like Ultimates.
it
But,
is.
this Absolute Batman run, is doing something that's interesting that the Batman movie from 3 years ago, from 2022 or 2021, kinda did, where Bruce Wayne is his character, like, he doesn't really have 2 personalities. Like, he doesn't feel like a playboy. He kinda feels, like, autistic, like, doesn't really make a lot of eye contact, just got a single he's just Batman without a costume. And there's something kind of interesting about that, of having that kind of, uh, fixated, kinda loner attitude, whether he's in or out of the bat suit. And I got that impression in this comic too, that I don't know if this is downstream of the movie, or if this is just something that people, sometimes kind of key into as a different take with Batman. I kind of get the impression there's nothing new to this kind of approach, and maybe I just like the Nolan movies too much, where there was a very clear, even, almost comically so, down to the voice
Yeah.
distinction between Bruce Wayne and Batman. This feels like he's the same guy. He just kind of sits, he plays cards with his rogues gallery, and he's only there. He's only really there, unlike everyone else who's just there to have a good time. He's only really there to solve a crime, and he's out of the bat suit.
Yeah,
You
the
know?
duality is definitely gone. But I
Yeah.
would say with this Batman, it's not that, Bruce Wayne has adopted the Batman persona. It's that Batman is more like a Jim Bro Bruce Wayne. And and I
Yeah.
think that's more in line with the way that the character is presented here, where he's
Mm.
hanging out and he's hitting the heavy bags in the local community gym before he goes and jumps into his killdozer, which is like,
With Doc Croc. Yeah.
how did a blue collar guy get one of those things? So yeah, but he's definitely Jim Bro Batman, and that's where I feel like this is growing into its own thing, um,
Mm.
and I'm starting to like the villain setup a little bit more. It has more meat than just a bunch of random hoodlums running around, which is what it felt like in the first issue. There seems to be some intent behind it now, so I'm curious to see where it develops. But it isn't Batman really, beyond just a few aesthetic nods.
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
I'm not sure if I entirely agree with that. Like it is very different. But then we have to kind of like nail down what is Batman. And one thing I will say about Batman that is very interesting is the fact that he arguably more than most, or arguably more than uh, almost any other comic book character, is able to exist in multiple versions of himself. There is a noir Batman, and it's totally Batman. There is a sci-fi Batman that is totally Batman. There is a kid version that's totally Batman. There's essentially a Batman
Mm.
for all seasons and for all people. And if you pull into his rich history and pull something out, there's like a sci-fi weird version where he's just fighting aliens and stuff. And then there's like the Adam West one, and then there's the Matt Reeves one. And if you put any of those Batmen right next to each other, the amount of differences between them are so extreme that you could say one of them isn't Batman because of how different it is from another. And so boiling him down can sometimes be difficult because of how radically different he is while still very clearly somehow still being Batman on some level. And so the time will tell as to whether or not I think audiences will say that there is or isn't enough Batman here to actually be Batman or not. But it is a fascinating thing to think about. Like, how far can you take that particular character? Because by golly, over nearly 100 years, they have taken him in so many radical directions, more so than almost any other superhero character that has ever existed.
Yeah, Batman is generally a reflection of the era or the time that he currently is, presented in. And so, the Adam West Batman, I probably wouldn't compare him too closely to Frank Miller's Batman. I get that, the idea is supposed to be present, that there's the similar uh, character attributes to both of them. They have similar origins. They have similar secret identities, similar dualities, all of those things that are familiar to the character. But the way that they're represented is drastically different. Um, this Batman doesn't feel like a Batman of this age. It just doesn't
Mhm.
feel like the character because there's so many of those core characteristics that have been gutted. It's not simply just a different. It isn't Neil Adams coming in all of a sudden and giving us a new, darker reinterpretation of Batman than what we've been familiar with from the Silver Age. This is a completely detached rendition of the character, where all of the motivations that originally make Batman and all of the aspects that you could uh, point to say that he does still hold the same, key fundamental traits that would make him who he is are not present in this character. So for me, it's really hard to just put him in that same category and say, this is the Batman of the current age, but still a Batman.
I think you can make a case that he is. I don't know how good of a case. I'd have to think about it. but even even like I said, the fact that they have framed the violence differently does feel like it's from our age, even in a very kind of twisted way. Because like I said, it wasn't just a noir-esque murder, right? Like that they normally portray in Crime Alley for his origin. They portray it, like I said, more like a mass shooting that happened at a zoo, right? Something that happened in a public place they shouldn't happen in, and this guy's being, killing kind of indiscriminately.
Which is
And
an
it's that
awful origin, to be honest.
it is, but to be fair, it is something that is a part of our cultural imagination. It is something from our era. And if you're going to have a character have an origin that's rooted in gun violence in our era and have it be, have some a deep resonant truth to it, that is an angle you can take that's very much of our time. I don't like it. It's deeply
Well,
unsettling. I'm not saying I want it for Batman, but I think you can make the case that that is a sense of reinterpreting the character for our time. And if we are uncomfortable with that, it's because we're uncomfortable with our time, which is a very valid position to take. But I think you can make a case that he is a Batman of our time, and like I said, if we don't like it, it's because we don't like our time very much. We'd like to escape to another time, which
Yeah.
is partly what superheroes are meant to do sometimes. So that might be that's something I think that again, time will tell as to how this series is taken. But I did before we bury the lead too much. We've talked about the Killdozer Batmobile, and that's going to be one of the biggest takeaways from this issue and from this series as a whole. They'll write articles for years about that. What is your non-hot take, non-mimetic take on the Batman Killdozer as being like what was your first impression of that? Because like I said, a lot of people are going to zero in specifically on that image, and some people will cringe the hell out on it, and some people may think it's super cool. So what were your takes on that?
That's a fascinating question. I don't think that the meme of Killdozer bubbles up to DC Comics, even to the illustrator that worked on it. I'd be very surprised, because even though there's the blue collar kind of populist kind of approach happening in Absolute Batman here, I'd be very surprised. I just think that people don't. I think mainstream comics doesn't know what to do with a meme until it's absolutely gelded and defunctionalized and put in a museum. And I feel like that's still a living meme. So I feel like it's probably something of a coincidence of just thinking of how does someone bust a vehicle out of a building. It's going to need some kind of extra iron plating, right, and some kind of triangle thing on the front to help leverage and smash cars out of the way. I could be wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not as brave as the illustrator may be for adding this.
Did you think it was a valid Batmobile take?
I mean, we've seen the craziest takes on the Batmobile, throughout history. So at this point, I'm not willing to say anything isn't a valid Batmobile take.
Okay.
It's got every variation.
It's been a literal tank before, essentially. Yeah.
He's got every variation of vehicle imaginable. Why not a dump truck? Maybe a cement mixer. Just get the whole construction site there in the Batcave.
We've already kind of accepted that he doesn't have to have a rich person's car, right? That's basically what we're saying. He doesn't have to, we can still be interested in him, and he's not necessarily identifying with the elite, when he's out of the suit. So I don't know if his vehicle has to be an elite vehicle.
I think Dragata's art here sells it a little bit. I think if you're going to do a Batman Killdozer truck, I think that's something that could either be super stupid or kind of epic and awesome. I think Dragata's art is a strong point for this pitch of taking Batman in very different directions. His art is very dynamic. It's interesting and fun to look at. And so I think without his art selling this story, I think if you had a different artist on it, I think the story wouldn't work as well as it does. And I know that for some people it doesn't, but I would say that I think Dragata is helping it and not hurting it.
Just before we wrap up, give a one hot take and throw the question out there and see what you guys think. Did Snyder softball the origin here by not making it a school shooting and choosing to do a zoo setting instead?
He might have. I think he had to find a way to, because without him putting it at the zoo, I think it would be harder to actually make him. You mentioned this earlier, Well Read. It's like, how is he Batman, right? So you have to put bats in there somewhere, and so at that point you have to put bats at the school, I guess. And so here, by making it a zoo, and it ties in with the party animals, so they're trying to relate some of these things together. And so I think that it might be a cop out, but I think it might also just be the sort of practical choice of, okay, I have to very quickly establish how this guy is related to bats in some way. And the quickest way to do that without having to waste any more panel or page space is to kind of kill two birds with one stone. Sorry for the metaphor there. And unify Death at zoo. I can put bats in. Now he's Batman.
But he took a soft hand, though, to the cultural relevance that you were alluding to, and there might have been more impact in the original Batman origin story of a family being murdered in an alleyway than there is for an era when school shootings are familiar and personal to people to have that same kind of event occur, but in a zoo instead. So it just feels like he missed the mark a little bit on the commentary that he was trying to make and the emotional trauma that he was trying to hit by making this character
So
relatable to our
so
era.
many gun metaphors there. He's missing the mark on what he's trying to hit.
You know what? That makes me think it was Killdozer at the end. I completely reverse my opinion now because this story is trying to manage culturally relevant memes for a younger generation of things that have visceral visual impact, you know, and
Mhm.
that's an example of mismanagement of a meme. So of course he would use Killdozer. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think that's a mistake, the Killdozer thing. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the school shooting illusions in the origin story.
Cool. Final thoughts, guys. Metzi.
Yeah, continues. We didn't mention it probably because it was so successful. The art continues to be really pleasing. I think this story kind of settled down and found a routine a little bit more. We got some longer scenes with some decent dialogue, character development, and that sort of thing. Continue to be interested in this arc. It's interesting. It's taking some risks, which is fun. Doesn't feel safe. So I'm looking forward to issue 3.
Twitless. Final thought.
I'm okay with it so far. It has not pissed me off yet to the point where I need to throw it away or anything. I'm on the fence, I think, on some of the risks it's taking. Um, they're doing okay. We'll see. Like I said, it could go either way for me, but I think I'm still interested in seeing where it goes, at least for the next few more issues. Yeah.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.